My name is Jordan Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. What happened when my former boss walked into conference room last Thursday morning is something that will forever change how he thinks about leadership potential, professional judgment, and the consequences of dismissing someone's ambitions because they don't fit traditional expectations. Picture this: Richard Kane, the man who had laughed in my face 14 months earlier when I'd asked for a promotion to team lead, stepping confidently into what he thought was a routine quarterly review meeting, only to freeze completely when he saw me sitting at the head of the table, not as his former subordinate, but as the newly appointed regional director who now controlled his career trajectory. You see, that moment when our eyes met across the conference table wasn't just awkward, it was the culmination of 14 months of the most focused career building I'd ever experienced, driven by the memory of his dismissive laughter when he'd told me I wasn't leadership material and would never have what it takes to manage people. The same man who had blocked my internal promotions while advancing less qualified candidates was now sitting in front of the person whose potential he'd been too blind to recognize. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about professional vindication and the moment when people who underestimated you realize they were catastrophically wrong. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes the best response to being told you'll never succeed is to build success so undeniable that it literally puts you in charge of the person who doubted you. Let me take you back to that devastating day in March 2023, when I walked into Richard's office to discuss my career development and left questioning everything I thought I knew about my professional potential and my future with the company. I had been working at Meridian Solutions for 3 years as a senior marketing analyst, consistently exceeding performance targets and receiving positive feedback from colleagues and clients. Our team was responsible for developing marketing strategies for mid-sized companies, and I had successfully led several high-profile projects that had generated significant revenue increases for our clients. But despite my track record, I'd been passed over for promotion twice, both times watching as Richard advanced candidates who had less experience, weaker performance metrics, and frankly, less innovative approaches to the work we were doing. The breaking point came when our team lead position opened up again, and Richard began interviewing candidates. I had prepared extensively, documenting my contributions, outlining my vision for team development, and developing a comprehensive strategy for expanding our service offerings. "Richard, I'd like to discuss the team lead opening," I said when I knocked on his office door that Tuesday morning. "Jordan, come in, sit down." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk with the weary expression he used when he was about to have conversations he'd rather avoid. "I want to formally apply for the position. I prepared a presentation showing my contributions to the team and my plans for leadership." "That's what I was afraid you'd want to discuss." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. He was afraid I'd want to discuss advancing my career, as if my professional ambitions were a problem he hoped to avoid. "I don't understand." "Jordan, you're a good analyst. You do solid work, you meet your deadlines, and clients generally like working with you. But being a good analyst doesn't automatically translate to being a good leader. Leadership requires a different skill set, a different mindset, a different way of interacting with people. What specific leadership skills do you think I'm lacking?" He leaned back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with having to articulate his reasoning. "It's not about specific skills you're lacking. It's about presence. Authority. The kind of natural command that makes people want to follow someone." "Natural command?" "Some people are born leaders, Jordan. They walk into a room and people listen. They speak and others pay attention. They have an instinctive understanding of how to motivate and direct teams. And you don't think I have those qualities? I think you're more suited to individual contributor roles. You're analytical, detail-oriented, good at solving problems on your own. But managing people, setting strategic direction, making tough decisions under pressure, those aren't your strengths." I sat there processing what he was telling me. According to Richard, I lacked the fundamental qualities necessary for leadership, not skills I could develop or experience I could gain, but innate characteristics that people either possessed or they didn't. What would it take for me to develop those leadership capabilities? Jordan, I'm trying to be honest with you here. Some people have leadership potential, and others don't. It's not a criticism, it's just reality. You're valuable in your current role, and there's nothing wrong with being really good at what you do. So you don't think I'll ever be promoted to a management position? Not in this organization. Maybe somewhere else, with different expectations or standards, but here? I don't see it happening. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Richard explaining why the team lead position required someone with natural authority and why he was considering candidates who better fit his vision of what leadership looked like. Let me ask you this, I said finally. If I were to apply for leadership positions elsewhere, what would you tell potential employers about my capabilities? I'd be honest. I'd say you're a reliable analyst who does good work within defined parameters, but that I haven't seen evidence of strategic thinking or people management skills. You'd actively discourage other employers from considering me for leadership roles? I'd give them my professional assessment based on 3 years of working with you. I left that meeting feeling lower than I'd ever felt in my professional life. My direct supervisor, the person who knew my work better than anyone, had just told me I lacked the fundamental qualities for leadership and would actively discourage other employers from considering me for management positions. But something else happened during that conversation, something Richard couldn't have anticipated. His dismissal of my potential had crystallized a determination in me that was more focused and more powerful than any motivation I'd ever experienced. If Richard thought I wasn't leadership material, I was going to prove him wrong in the most undeniable way possible. Not by arguing with his assessment, not by trying to change his mind, but by building leadership credentials so impressive that his opinion would become irrelevant. If you've ever been told by a boss that you don't have what it takes to advance in your career, type leadership denied in the comments. What comes next will show you exactly how wrong people can be when they mistake quiet competence for lack of potential. The day after Richard's devastating assessment of my leadership potential, I made a decision that would define the next 14 months of my life. I was going to build the kind of resume that would make his evaluation look ridiculous in hindsight. But I wasn't going to do it by trying to prove myself within Meridian Solutions, where Richard's preconceptions would always limit my opportunities. Instead, I was going to build external credentials that would eventually give me options he couldn't control or influence. I started by enrolling in an executive leadership certificate program at the State University, attending classes on evenings and weekends while maintaining my full-time responsibilities. The program was designed for working professionals and covered strategic planning, team dynamics, organizational psychology, and change management, exactly the skills Richard claimed I lacked. But more importantly, it connected me with other professionals who were building leadership careers in various industries. The networking opportunities were extraordinary, and I began building relationships with people who saw potential in me that my current employer couldn't recognize. 3 months into the program, I was approached by Sarah Chen, a former classmate who worked in business development for a regional consulting firm. She mentioned that her company was looking for someone with marketing strategy experience to join their client services team, with clear advancement potential for the right candidate. Jordan, you should consider applying. They're specifically looking for someone with your background who wants to move into consulting and eventually client management. I'm not sure I'm qualified for consulting work. Are you kidding? You've been developing marketing strategies for mid-sized companies for 3 years. That's exactly what consulting firms need, people who understand how to solve real business problems. The conversation planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. While Richard was telling me I wasn't leadership material, other professionals were suggesting I had exactly the skills and experience that growing companies valued. I applied for the consulting position and was invited for a series of interviews that were unlike anything I'd experienced at Meridian Solutions. Instead of being evaluated against Richard's narrow definition of leadership, I was being assessed on my ability to understand complex business problems, develop creative solutions, and communicate strategies effectively to senior executives. The final interview was with Marcus Webb, the regional director who would be my ultimate supervisor if hired. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from market analysis methodologies to team building philosophies. "Jordan, I'm impressed by your analytical capabilities and your strategic thinking," Marcus said near the end of our discussion. "But what really stands out is your understanding of how to translate data into actionable recommendations. That's a rare skill." "Thank you. I've always believed that analysis is only valuable if it leads to better decision-making." "Exactly. And that kind of insight is what we need from our senior consultants, people who can work with clients to identify opportunities and develop implementation strategies." "Senior consultants?" "The position we're offering isn't entry-level consulting. We're looking for someone who can immediately contribute to client engagements and potentially move into team leadership within 18 months. Team leadership within 18 months. The same career advancement that Richard had told me would never happen was being offered as a natural progression by someone who had spent 2 hours evaluating my actual capabilities. I received the job offer 3 days later, senior consultant position with a 40% salary increase, immediate client responsibility, and a clear path to promotion based on performance rather than someone else's assessment of my natural authority. My resignation from Meridian Solutions was scheduled for a Friday afternoon meeting with Richard. I had prepared a professional 2-week notice and was ready to maintain positive relationships despite our previous conversation about my leadership limitations. "Jordan, I have to say I'm surprised by your decision to leave," Richard said when I handed him my resignation letter. "Where are you going?" "I've accepted a senior consultant position with Strategic Solutions Group." "Consulting?" "Jordan, that's a very different environment from what you're used to. Are you sure you're prepared for that kind of client-facing responsibility?" "I'm confident in my abilities to succeed in the new role." "Well, I hope it works out for you. Just remember that consulting requires a different skill set, more strategic thinking, more client management, more leadership presence than what you've demonstrated here." Even in my resignation meeting, Richard couldn't resist reinforcing his assessment that I lacked the capabilities necessary for career advancement. But this time, his words didn't sting, they motivated me to succeed at levels that would make his evaluation look absurd. The transition to Strategic Solutions Group was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within my first 3 months, I was leading client engagements, developing strategic recommendations that were being implemented by Fortune 500 companies, and receiving feedback that validated everything I'd believed about my own potential. "Jordan, your work on the Morrison Industries project was exceptional," Marcus told me during my 6-month review. "The client specifically requested that you lead their next phase of strategic planning." "I'm glad the recommendations were well received. It's more than that. Your ability to understand their business challenges and translate data into clear action plans impressed their entire executive team. That kind of strategic thinking is exactly what we need more of." Strategic thinking. The same capability Richard had claimed I lacked was being praised as one of my strongest professional assets. By month 9, I was promoted to Senior Consulting Manager, with responsibility for overseeing client engagements and mentoring junior consultants. By month 12, I was leading the firm's largest client relationship and had been selected to present our strategic planning methodology at the Regional Business Development Conference. But the breakthrough that would ultimately put me face-to-face with Richard came during month 13, when Marcus called me into his office for a conversation that would change everything. "Jordan, I've been offered a position as Vice President of Strategy at our parent company's headquarters. It's an incredible opportunity, but it means leaving my role here as Regional Director." "Congratulations, Marcus. That sounds like an amazing advancement." "Thank you. But here's the thing, I've been asked to recommend my replacement, and there's only one person I trust to maintain the client relationships and continue building our regional presence." "Who's that?" "You, Jordan. I want to recommend you for promotion to Regional Director." "Regional Director." "The position that would give me authority over multiple consulting teams, responsibility for strategic planning across the entire region, and oversight of client relationships worth millions in annual revenue. Marcus, I'm honored by your confidence, but I've only been here 14 months. Jordan, in those 14 months, you've demonstrated more strategic leadership than most people show in their entire careers. You've built client relationships that generated $3.2 million in new revenue, mentored junior staff who consistently exceed performance targets, and developed consulting methodologies that we're now implementing company-wide. Do you really think I'm ready for that level of responsibility? I think you've been ready for this level of responsibility for years. Someone just needed to recognize it and give you the opportunity. The promotion was approved within 2 weeks, making me the youngest regional director in Strategic Solutions Group's history and putting me in charge of operations that included competitive analysis of other consulting firms in our market, including Meridian Solutions. Which brings us to last Thursday morning, when I walked into conference room A4. What I knew would be an encounter that would validate every decision I'd made since leaving Richard's limited vision of my potential. Strategic Solutions Group had been asked to evaluate potential partnerships with smaller marketing firms, and Meridian Solutions was on our list of companies to assess. The meeting was scheduled as a routine business development discussion, with their leadership team presenting their capabilities to our executive committee. I arrived early and took my seat at the head of the conference table, reviewing the materials our research team had prepared about Meridian's recent performance, client relationships, and market position. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now evaluating the company that had once dismissed my leadership potential. At exactly 9 a.m., Meridian's team arrived for the meeting. Richard walked in first, looking confident and prepared to impress potential partners with his company's marketing expertise and client success stories. But when he saw me sitting at the head of the table, his confident expression dissolved into shock, confusion, and something that looked like fear. "Jordan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Richard. Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss about potential partnership opportunities." He remained standing for a moment, processing what he was seeing. His former subordinate, the person he'd told wasn't leadership material, was now sitting in the position of authority while he was the one seeking business partnerships. You're the regional director?" "That's correct. I'll be leading today's evaluation of Meridian Solutions as a potential strategic partner for our consulting services." The rest of his team filed into the room, unaware of our history but clearly sensing the tension between Richard and their potential client. They took their seats while Richard remained frozen, trying to understand how the power dynamic had reversed so completely. "Richard," I said professionally, "shall we begin? I understand you have a presentation about Meridian's capabilities and market position." The meeting proceeded with surreal formality. Richard, who had once dismissed my strategic thinking abilities, was now presenting to me as someone whose approval could significantly impact his company's growth trajectory. His confidence was completely gone, replaced by nervous energy and frequent glances in my direction to gauge my reaction to their presentation. When he finished, I asked the kinds of strategic questions that any regional director would ask when evaluating potential partners, questions about market differentiation, client retention strategies, scalability of their service model, and long-term competitive positioning. But what made the conversation particularly satisfying was watching Richard realize that I was asking exactly the kinds of strategic questions he'd claimed I wasn't capable of thinking about, and that his answers would be evaluated by someone whose judgment would determine his company's future opportunities. "One final question," I said as the formal presentation concluded. "How does Meridian Solutions identify and develop leadership talent within the organization?" The question was pointed and personal, and Richard knew it. He fumbled through an answer about leadership development programs and promotion criteria, but we both knew I was really asking about his ability to recognize potential in people who didn't fit traditional leadership stereotypes. After his team left, I sat alone in the conference room thinking about the journey that had brought me to that moment. 14 months earlier, Richard had laughed at my leadership aspirations and told me I'd never have what it takes to manage people. Now he was seeking partnerships with the company where I had authority over decisions that could significantly impact his professional future. The boss who had mocked me as not leadership material had just spent an hour trying to impress me with his company's capabilities while I evaluated whether his organization was worthy of our strategic partnership. 2 days later, I delivered my assessment to our executive committee. Meridian Solutions showed potential for partnership, but their leadership team lacked the strategic vision and adaptability necessary for long-term collaboration in our evolving market. It wasn't personal revenge, it was professional judgment based on the same analytical and strategic thinking capabilities that Richard had claimed I didn't possess. The partnership proposal was declined. 6 months later, when Marcus was promoted again and I was asked to take on additional regional responsibilities, I received a LinkedIn message from Richard. "Jordan, I want to congratulate you on your continued success. I also want to apologize for underestimating your potential when you worked here. Watching your career development has taught me that I need to reconsider how I evaluate leadership capabilities in others." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that his assessment of my potential had been catastrophically wrong. But the real validation wasn't his apology, it was the knowledge that I had built exactly the kind of leadership career he'd told me I'd never be capable of achieving, and had done it at a level that put me in position to evaluate his professional capabilities rather than the other way around. Sometimes the best response to being told you don't have leadership potential isn't to argue or defend yourself, it's to build leadership credentials so undeniable that you end up in charge of the person who doubted you. And sometimes the sweetest professional vindication is simply being successful enough that your former boss has to seek your approval instead of giving you his assessment of your limitations. What leadership potential has a boss failed to recognize in you? What career advancement have you achieved after being told you weren't ready? Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been dismissed by a supervisor who couldn't see your potential, you're not alone. Comment leadership proven if you believe potential is often overlooked by people who have narrow definitions of what leadership looks like. Share this story with someone who needs to know that being underestimated by a boss can become the motivation for career advancement that puts you in charge of evaluating their performance. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about professional vindication, career development, and the moment when people who doubted your potential realize they were completely wrong about your capabilities. I'd love to know, should bosses be more open to different styles of leadership potential, or is it natural that some management styles are valued more than others in traditional corporate environments? Let me know in the comments. Remember, your leadership potential isn't determined by one person's assessment, but when you build credentials that put you in position to evaluate their judgment instead of accepting their limitations, it proves that potential often goes unrecognized until it becomes undeniable.